I really honestly expected to love this one, and unfortunately, that just didn't quite happen. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to be talking about The Winter King by Bernard Cornwell, which I had a much more mixed time than what I would have expected, to be honest. I do, however, have the exact perfect shirt to wear for this review. Just makes sense. But yeah, I honestly really expected to love this one. I'm not super well read with historical fiction, but I've heard really good things about this. I've always enjoyed Arthurian legend and that kind of stuff too. And Bernard Cornwell is one of those authors that I've heard really great things about. I know he has a lot of stuff that's very popular, and I'd heard specifically really good things about the audio narration in this as well. So he did a nice chunk of it there. And I was warned, I will say, that the beginning is quite slow, which it is, but for some reason, I just never really felt myself engaged with this one. And I don't think in any way this is like a bad book or poorly written. I think for me, it's just the storytelling style and the writing style just never fully clicked. And I think that's ultimately what did. So I'm going to kind of talk through this. The things that worked for me and didn't as well, and go from there. But yeah, I know there's going to be plenty of people probably mad that I didn't like this. And like I said, I don't think this is bad. I did land with like 3 stars just because I didn't really care for it, and it wasn't super engaging, but it still had some strengths and some things that I think work really well. So this is sort of an alternate telling of Arthur, which granted, with Arthurian legend, everything's kind of, an alternate retelling. But this is specifically doing some things different, but it's centering around like the character who's actually telling the story, Dervil, who was a servant of Merlin and who knew Arthur very well and served him for many years as well. And it's much after the fact, and he's writing down the story and kind of telling it to somebody else. And so that's kind of how we go in. I think partially, because telling a story like that and going in and telling it, I think that can absolutely work. But I think partially it's just the character voice of Dervil never fully clicked in, so that probably is a part of it. When this is being told as he's telling the story and explaining what happened as well from his point of view. Since I wasn't super pulled into that character, I feel like that's probably a good chunk of the reason why it just didn't necessarily work. But I think overall it does set up a lot of interesting things. And the beginning, I will just say, the beginning was straight up boring, like kind of the first part. And it reads as just like, oh, this happened and then that happened. And I feel like there are some like big actiony parts and things like that, but so much of this just feels, granted, it is historical fiction, so I understand it's a little ironic to say, but it just kind of feels like somebody is reading you a history. And it wasn't super engaging for that reason. So I think for me, if you're really big on historical fiction and you don't mind when it's a bit drier, I don't mind dry, but I also need something. And so for me, where I have more of a preference for the fantastical, I can still really enjoy historical fiction or other things too, but I need something else to pull me in, I feel like. And so the thing I feel like I'd compare to, I read the first Boudica book by Amanda Scott, Dreaming the Eagle, I think is the first one. And that I actually feel like plot-wise was a little bit weaker than this one, but the storytelling was just very engaging. The writing style and the way that we were weaving everything together, it really felt like it pulled me in, I guess. It was very engaging, and I didn't quite get that here. And then like you have Guy Gabriel Kay, who's a bit more on the fantasy side, but writes more historical fantasy where it's sort of alternate things as well, and has like that really beautiful prose to pull in. And I read some other things that have mixes, but there's got to be something. And for me, this one was just really missing that something. So I know there has to be other people out there who felt the same way with this one, but I was a bit disappointed because of that, and I really did expect to enjoy this, but this does make me wonder if Bernard Cornwell just may not be an author for me, because I think stylistically it just didn't really mesh. Now, the biggest strength, I will say, is the action in the books, because this is not an action-packed book by any means. It is a little bit slower going, but there are lots of like really big action events happening. Some of them happen quite suddenly, just like sudden moments of violence, and I do feel like there is a fair bit of realism in there too as well, which you would really want in historical fiction, which is the way things are described, what's happening, what people are doing, the realities of some of these situations, and we focus it. So this feels a little bit less of like following the more heroic version, and it's like trying to go a little bit more on the realism spectrum, I think. And interesting with it is, even though this is written as, historical fiction, and so like we still are referencing like the druids and their gods and Christianity and the Christian God and that kind of thing. There's talk of like there being power, but we don't actually see any of it. So that's something I think depends how far you want to go with that, because some of the stuff will have more fantastical things in some of the tales. This is more so being what may have actually like happened, although I think it's very purposely trying to do a different spin on a lot of the things. But part of the conceit here is that the story is being told, and D'Urville, who's the narrator, is saying like, no, it didn't really happen like that. After years, people have embellished it, and there's a talk of like, instead of a sword being in the stone, it was just laid down and challenge. And, so it's kind of doing that kind of thing. I think that's a fun spin where you're going back and seeing like what really happened that got changed later. But again, it didn't really jump that far. And that's, for me, and this part is, I will say, incredibly subjective. It's the writing here, and I think the reason why I ultimately struggled a bit is because this is a little bit slower, which again I don't mind. But the prose isn't anything that's like elevated enough that I'm like, ooh, I really like this prose. It's good. It's not bad by any means, but it's just like that didn't go to the next level. The dialogue, the narration isn't particularly like witty. There's not like a lot of humor throughout. There's nothing really here. It just sat very baseline for me, and I think that's kind of where I struggle. I just needed that little bit of something. And I've read books that I think this book is objectively better than some books that I've read, but that I was more engaged in due to other reasons. And so that's where this is one of my more subjective reviews, just because of the fact that like I said, I can't knock a ton of stuff with it. I think a lot of this was handled well. There were some things that just kind of felt a little bit random. Again, it is somebody telling their own story, so they're going to, jump around a bit. But there was just some pieces where it just seems like we go and we randomly do this, that, or it's a little bit scattered. And the parts, I will say, when we're in like the current time with D'Urville, who's telling the story now that he's older, I just didn't find myself particularly caring for those parts as much as when the story is actually progressing essentially around us. My other like nitpick is I felt like the villains, or the just kind of like not necessarily even villains, but like the adversarial characters just seemed a little bit like over the top. And it's one of those things. I think that's fine too. Like, there's characters, there's several characters, I suppose, who are just really bent on revenge, or who think they're very like holier than thou, or like we're seeing some of those types of archetypes, but they felt very just like over the top and almost caricature-ish. And that's something I felt with most of the characters. They didn't feel like they were really deep versions of the characters. We weren't like treading any new ground. We were just taking established characters, giving them some basic traits, and then using them in the story. And it's just more about the bigger picture, which I think is fine. And it's just, again, it's not really what I was looking for here as well. I did mention though some of the battle scenes are very, very strong, and those parts I enjoyed. And like toward the end, this did get a little bit better too for me. Like the last part, there's some larger battles, which I thought were really well done. The actual ending, I do think, was a really good way to end it. And again, it's just I wasn't super engaged, so like I can recognize the ending was very good, but I still didn't care that much, to be honest as well. So this is one of those books I'd be curious to see people who, if you've read more historical fiction than I am, how this compares to some of the other things that you've read. Like I said, I'm not super well read. Like I loved Count of Monte Cristo, and I read the first Boudica book. I still need to continue that series. This does remind me. And then, I read some Guy Gabriel Kay, which is not quite the same thing either. Kate Elliott has kind of historical fantasy feel in Crown of Stars, which has some like alternate history, but it really worked for me there as well. So like, I'm just curious how people think comparing this to some other things, and or comparing it to Bernard Cornwell's other things. Do you think that I might like some of his other stuff, or do you think I might hit something similar? Like, does his narrative style tend to be close enough, or his writing style tend to be close enough? Because I am just legitimately curious. I know this is a really loved book, and I really wanted to like it, and I don't even feel like this was like an expectations thing. I just kind of kept expecting like, oh, I'm sure it'll like get better for me. I'm sure I'll enjoy more, and it just never really happened, unfortunately. So, yeah, that's pretty much where I landed on The Winter King. I'm a little bit sad of it. I don't think I'm going to be continuing with this series most likely just because, again, I wasn't super pulled in. Although I do think it's really solid. And if you like Arthurian stuff and if you like historical fiction, this may work much better for you. Like I said, this is one of those ones where it's hard to kind of put my finger on what exactly didn't work. And I tried to do that as I was talking out loud and just explaining my thoughts as I went in this video. But really, it's just ultimately it never clicked. And sometimes there's nothing you can do about that. Sometimes books just don't click for different people. And that's where you are. But that's it for this one. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the links in the description, as always, for the Patreon if you want to support what I do, as well as the Wizardly Enclave Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun. We'd love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.